After the dust settled from the band's most recent tour, the expectation felt almost automatic. The Rolling Stones had just completed one of the most successful runs of their entire career. Stadiums were full. Tickets moved fast. The demand didn't slow down. If anything, it grew louder. For fans, the logic was simple. If the band could do that in 2024, then 2026 felt like the natural next step. Europe and the UK seemed inevitable. Rumors spread quietly at first, then with more confidence. Stadium availability, tentative windows, industry chatter that suggested something was forming behind the scenes. Nothing was officially announced, but nothing felt denied either. That silence created momentum, and momentum, with a band like this, becomes expectation. Fans didn't see 2026 as a gamble. They saw it as continuity. Proof that the Stones were still operating at full scale, still willing to meet the world on its biggest stages. What most people didn't realize was that the story wasn't slowing down publicly, it was slowing down privately. Because while the audience was looking forward, the band was already pausing. And the pause wasn't about demand. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about desire to perform. It was about something far less visible and far more personal. And that became clear the moment the conversation shifted from when to whether. Before we continue, if you love the stories of Mick Jagger and Rolling Stones and want to help keep his legacy alive, subscribe to this channel, like, and share. Before 2026 ever became the focus, there was already a year that vanished without explanation. Plans for 2025 didn't fall apart publicly. They didn't trigger headlines or statements. They were simply set aside, quietly, without ceremony. And to most fans, that detail slipped by unnoticed. But in hindsight, it mattered. The absence of 2025 wasn't strategic suspense. It was the first signal that something had changed. Momentum was no longer the driving force. Caution was. Conversations that once moved quickly were now moving carefully. For a band known for surviving chaos, this level of restraint felt unusual. Still, hope shifted forward. If not 2025, then 2026. Fans recalibrated expectations and waited. Europe became the focal point. The idea that the Stones would return once more, on their terms, but at full scale. And then came the moment that disrupted that belief. Not an announcement, not a cancellation notice, but a sentence delivered calmly, without drama, that reframed everything fans thought they understood. For the first time in a long while, someone inside the band didn't lean into possibility. They leaned into honesty. And that honesty came from the one person most people never expected to hear it from. When Keith Richards finally addressed the situation, the shock wasn't in what he said. It was in how he said it. There was no frustration, no defensiveness, no dramatic framing. Just a simple admission that caught fans off guard. He wasn't sure he could commit to another full-scale stadium tour. That sentence landed differently than any cancellation ever could. Keith didn't question the music, he didn't question the band, and he didn't question the desire to play. What he questioned was the reality surrounding everything outside the performance. A stadium tour at this level isn't just a series of shows. It's months of preparation, endless travel, long-distance flights, rehearsals that demand physical precision, a massive production that moves like a small city from one location to the next. Keith made a distinction that mattered. His passion for playing hasn't faded, but the total weight of a modern stadium tour is something he now measures differently. That wasn't weakness. It was awareness. For decades, Keith was the symbol of endurance, the last man standing, the one who never blinked. Hearing him acknowledge limits didn't signal an ending, but it did signal a shift. And that shift reframed the entire conversation. Because when someone like Keith Richards hesitates, it isn't about age. It's about choosing how and whether to keep moving forward. From the outside, a stadium tour looks simple. A stage, a crowd, 2 hours of music, then on to the next city. The reality is nothing like that. At this level, a tour becomes a full-time system that never stops moving. Weeks of rehearsals before the first note is played. Constant travel across time zones. Long-haul flights that reset the body before it has time to recover. Entire days built around logistics rather than music. The performance is just the visible tip. Behind it sits a massive production that has to be rebuilt night after night. Sound checks, technical adjustments, security coordination, media commitments. The mental focus required to stay sharp when every detail matters. For younger artists, this intensity is exhausting. For veterans, it becomes a calculation. Keith's hesitation wasn't about whether he could walk on stage and play. It was about everything that surrounds that moment, the parts most fans never see and rarely consider. A stadium tour doesn't allow flexibility. Once it starts, it demands consistency, precision, and stamina with no real margin for error. That pressure doesn't disappear just because the audience is cheering. Acknowledging that weight doesn't diminish the music, it reframes it. And it forces a question the Stones haven't had to answer publicly in a long time. Not can they do it, but should they, exactly as before. Whenever a major tour stalls, the rumors arrive quickly. Creative disagreements, internal tension, power struggles behind closed doors. Fans are conditioned to look for drama, especially with a band whose history is famously turbulent. But this time, that story doesn't fit. Keith made it clear that the decision wasn't rooted in conflict. There was no falling out, no disagreement that needed smoothing over. What happened instead was something far less dramatic and far more mature. An honest conversation. Decades of working together have created a rare level of trust within the band, the kind that allows uncomfortable truths to be spoken without becoming personal. Limits can be acknowledged without being seen as betrayal. That matters. In younger bands, hesitation can fracture momentum. In a band with this much history, it can redefine it. The difference is perspective. Rather than pushing forward out of habit or expectation, the Stones appear to be asking a different question now. What version of touring still makes sense? And that question doesn't need an immediate answer. The absence of conflict is what makes this moment feel unusual. There's no tension to resolve, no apology to issue, no damage to control. Just a collective understanding that not every door has to be opened immediately. And for fans, that calmness is almost more unsettling than chaos. This isn't the first time the Rolling Stones have faced doubt. They've been written off countless times. Too old, too reckless, too damaged to continue. Every decade brought predictions of an ending that never arrived. But this moment feels different, not because of crisis, but because of tone. Keith isn't defiant. He isn't challenging time or daring it to catch him. He's speaking with clarity, with restraint, with a sense of control that wasn't always present in earlier years. That shift changes how the message lands. For fans, the shock isn't that a tour might not happen. It's that the hesitation came from the person least expected to express it. The symbol of endurance, acknowledging boundaries, forces a reevaluation of everything that follows. This isn't surrender. It's prioritization. And that distinction matters more than any schedule. By choosing not to promise what he isn't sure he can deliver, Keith reframes longevity itself. Survival isn't about never stopping. It's about knowing when momentum should pause. That's why this moment resonates. It's not dramatic. It's honest. And honesty, when it replaces bravado, signals a new chapter, not an ending. Once the idea of a 2026 stadium run started to fade, a bigger question took its place. Not when the Rolling Stones might tour again, but how? Stadium tours are the most demanding format in live music. They leave little room for flexibility and almost no margin for rest. Once dates are locked, the machine moves forward, whether you're ready or not. That model worked when the goal was scale above all else. But scale isn't the only measure of impact anymore. Keith's comments didn't shut the door on live performances. They narrowed the frame, and that distinction matters. He didn't say never again. He said there's no stadium tour locked in. That wording is intentional. It suggests that the issue isn't performing, it's committing to a format that no longer adapts to the band's reality. And for the Stones, adaptation has always been the reason they survived longer than anyone expected. So when fans ask if this is the end of stadium tours, the more accurate answer might be simpler: it could be the end of default stadium tours. The band doesn't need to prove scale anymore. They've already done that. What they need now is control. And control changes everything. Longevity in rock music is often misunderstood. It's usually framed as endurance, how long someone can keep pushing without stopping. But real longevity works differently. It's about knowing when pressure stops being productive and starts becoming destructive. Keith Richards understands that better than almost anyone. By acknowledging hesitation instead of ignoring it, he's protecting more than his health. He's protecting the band's ability to choose its future rather than react to expectations. That's a quiet form of power. Doing fewer shows doesn't mean doing less. It means doing things on terms that preserve intention, not obligation. And intention has always mattered to the Stones, even when chaos surrounded them. This moment isn't about slowing down because they can't continue. It's about slowing down because they can choose to. That choice is what separates survival from legacy. The Stones don't need to chase relevance. They don't need to answer speculation. They've earned the right to move selectively, and that selectivity might be what keeps them alive on stage longer than anyone predicts. Longevity isn't about never stopping. It's about stopping before something breaks. Despite all the uncertainty, one thing remains clear. Nothing has ended. There's no farewell announcement, no final chapter being written, just a pause, deliberate, thoughtful, and open-ended. And that openness may be the most honest statement the band could make. By refusing to lock in a 2026 stadium tour, the Rolling Stones aren't closing doors. They're leaving space. Space to reassess, space to reshape, space to decide what kind of live future actually makes sense. Keith's words weren't a warning, they were a recalibration. The band isn't stepping away from the stage, they're stepping away from assumptions, and that difference defines everything that comes next. For fans, that uncertainty can feel heavy, but it also carries possibility, because as long as the door remains open, the story isn't finished. It's just unwritten. And in the history of the Rolling Stones, the moments that aren't fully defined yet are often the ones that matter most. Keith Richards didn't announce an ending. He did something far more revealing. For the first time in a very long career, he spoke openly about hesitation, not because the music is gone, not because the band is fractured, but because the reality around modern stadium touring no longer fits as easily as it once did. That kind of honesty is rare, especially from someone who built a legacy on endurance. What this moment shows isn't decline, it's control. The understanding that longevity isn't about pushing forward at any cost, but about choosing when and how to move next. The Rolling Stones have outlasted eras by adapting, not by pretending nothing changes. The door isn't closed. It's simply not being rushed open. And maybe that's the most Stones-like decision of all, doing things on their own terms, even when the world is waiting for answers. Because sometimes the strongest statement a legend can make is knowing when to say, not yet. Do you think this is the end of stadium tours for the Rolling Stones, or the beginning of a different chapter? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy deep dives into rock history, behind-the-scenes decisions, and the moments that quietly change everything, like this video and subscribe to the channel. More stories are coming, and not all of them are written yet.